Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome back to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today is sponsored by Ike and Danny Masri in honor and in the zechut of their sons, who are tremendous contributors to our community in the city, in terms of the classes, in terms of the tefillot, in terms of the learning. It's very special to have them and their parents whenever they come. Also, we also want to say that this class should be dedicated Lilu Nishmat Afshin Ben Elisha. Tenishmatot Tzura B'Tzor Haim Be'ezat Hashem Yadeh Ma'ala Ma'ala Be'Gan Eden Mikeden. Also, today we'd like to wish this class as a refuah shlema for Rachel Bar Chaya, Chaim Fel Ben Frida Leah Shlomo Mazal Fortuné, and continued health for Chana Bat Sima Fega. Let's begin. The pasuk tells us a very interesting chapter in this week's parasha, and it discusses how in the instance of a murder, an unsolved murder. So back in the day when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, they didn't have true crime podcasts. They didn't have people who could figure out when they found a dead body in the middle of nowhere outside the city limits. They didn't know exactly how it was done. They didn't have, many of the things that we have today. They didn't have surveillance cameras operating 24/7. So forensics, they had a dead body in between two cities. And the halakha is that whenever that happens, so there's the process of eglah arufah. And eglah arufah is a fascinating chapter in the Torah. The Torah says, Ki matzil chalal ba'adama, lo noda mi hikau. We don't know who is the person who hit him. V'yatzeu zekenecha u'shoftecha. The elders and the judges will go out. U'madedu el he'arim asher svivot echalal. They literally drop, like in a Google map, you could drop a pin exactly where you are. And then if you check directions from there to Pia Village, from there to Deal Shul, from there to Safra Synagogue in Manhattan, from there to BMG in Lakewood, it will tell you exactly how many miles, 15.62 miles from here to here. They tape measure from the dead body all the way until the city. Now, of course, the Gemara says what happens if you measure from the guy's feet to one city is closer, from the head to another city is closer. Yeah, we're not going to get into the laws of the eglah arufah today, but they measure between the cities, these 6 cities surrounding, east, northeast, southeast, southwest, all the different possible angles, and they see what city is closest. And then, once they've identified which city is closest, vehoridu ziknei ha'ir et ha'eglah nachal etan. So then the elders of that city step up to the plate, and they bring this eglah all the way to the place Nachal Etan, ve'arfu sham et ha'eglah banachal. And at that point, they do it like a reverse korban, yani. Instead of doing normal shechita, they do they chop it from the orif. That's how they do this, and they say that our hands did not shed this blood. We are innocent. And they ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a whole prayer, and they really ask God even to bless the Jewish people. Hashkifa Mon Kodshecha, wild turn of events. And if you're studying it carefully, the more you study it, the more out there the whole process seems. What are you doing? You're guilty, bring a korban. Not a korban, you do it from the opposite side of the neck of the korban. If something's bad, so why are we asking for a beracha? Lots and lots of different questions swirl around it. However, I'd like to draw just a moment of focus to the simple part of the process of the measurement. Imagine Chacham Ovadia, imagine Rev Eliashiv, Zichrono Lebracha, Rev Shach, great Chacham Ezra Atiyeh, they're all traveling together. You want to see where they're going. So you drive alongside all the great Gedolim. They're traveling where? Not to yeshiva, they're going out to the middle of nowhere. They get out of their fancy, nice rabbi car, with the driver. They get into a Range Rover, 4-wheel drive. The guy's driving off-road, down the mountain, up the valley, till they get to the middle of nowhere. And they find this dead body. And imagine now the rabbi, Chamovadia, on one side with a tape measure, starts heading off in one direction. Rabbi Yashim in the other direction. I want to point this out. Let me go back to the pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'yaseu zekenecha v'shoftecha umadedu el ha'arim." If you want to tell me that you need a zaken and you need a shofet, you need an elder, a statesman, a rabbi, a judge, you want to tell me that you need them to rule on the case, fine. But why do you need a judge to run a measuring tape? You can't call a contractor to do it? The shoter, the enforcer that we read about in the beginning of the parasha, he's not good enough to measure it? What's the pasuk telling you? That it requires wisdom in the measurement. Why do you need the zaken and the shofet to measure el ha'arim asher sivot echalal? I think that the answer over here is something which I think is illuminating. In the end of the day, what we're trying to communicate here is that proximity is responsibility. Let me say that again. Proximity is responsibility. How close you are to something is how responsible you are for that thing. Someone else is further from that thing, they have less responsibility. So we have to ascertain. We're now going to level an accusation against somebody. Somebody didn't do the right thing here. Somebody didn't accompany this person on his walk. Somebody did not offer this person protection. Again, a lot of reasons brought down in the Mefarshim what the actual culpability here is. But for whatever reason, someone is responsible. This is a crime and someone's responsible. How do we decide who's responsible? Well, who's closest? Now imagine that responsibility was laid at their feet by a guy who installs air conditionings, by a man who repairs refrigerators. Nothing against refrigerator repairmen and air conditioners. By the way, when your air conditioner breaks down, the most important person in the world is not the president of the United States, not the head of your bank. The most important person in the world on a boiling hot weekend, when your air conditioner broke down, you call the guy like you're asking for the biggest favor. Zochrenu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim. Could you squeeze me in, please? Lema'ancha elokim chaim, please. Right? Not diminishing, but the people would be liable to say, someone made a mistake. This is not our problem. But when the Zekenim got in, and they measured, and they said, it's not them, and it's not them, and it's not them, and it's not them, it's you. When that finger is pointed at you now by the Zekenim, at that point, the person has no choice but to accept responsibility and to do teshuvah. And proximity is responsibility. Where do we find this idea brought down in halakha? Halakha is, let's say, person has money in their pocket. $100 they made at work today. How much money of that is yours? $90. Well, technically, nah. Technically, you'd only give maaser after taxes. So, depending on what tax bracket you're in, you don't have $100 in your pocket. Right? But let's just assume that taxes was already paid. They did it with good withholding in the office, okay? So the 100 is yours. 90 belongs to you. 10 belongs to whom? Fascinating language that's used in many different sugyot in the Gemara, especially in Takva Kohen. It's called Shevet Aniyim, the tribe of the poor. This belongs to the poor people, okay? So halakha says, what happens if a person comes along and grabs $10 out of the 100 out of your pocket. You want to be able to give it to tzedakah. Some poor guy comes, grabs it out of your pocket. You take the guy to Beit Din, you say, what's going on? You took $10 out of my pocket. The guy said, I didn't take $10 out of your pocket. I took my $10 out of your pocket. He says, what do you mean? He says, I'm poor. That was my money. The Gemara says that the guy could say, yeah, but I had the right to be able to decide which poor person to give it to. The end of that Gemara is that he has to pay him what's called tovat hana'ah. Tovat hana'ah means that there's a value to the price, there's a price to the fact that I get to decide where my tzedakah money goes. But how much is that worth? $1, $2? He doesn't have to give you back 10. He gives you back 2. Because $8 you weren't going to keep anyway. $8 you were going to give to a tzedakah. The difference is that it would have gone to a tzedakah that you liked more. So what's the value of that to you? $2. Let's say he gives $2 to him. But he gets to keep the rest of the 8. What happens now? What happens if there were other aniyim who deserved it first? A whole other sugya. What happens if the person who grabbed the money from your pocket was a family member who was an ani, poor man? What happens if he was a person from your city and you like to give money to other people from other cities? You want to give money to Chabad in Bulgaria, and this is a local need. The halacha is, just to be clear, this is not a Chabad conversation. I'm just pointing it out because that's a very common application. The poor people of your city come first. You owe that money to aniyim. Which aniyim? Aniyim of your town. Now, Chachamim tell us that you know who's also included in the poor people of your town? Aniyei Eretz Israel. Because every Jew, their town is Israel. You might live in Budapest, okay? But your town, Eretz Israel, is our town, is our country, is our land. You see it? Okay. Bishut Avi Mori. So, in such a case, one could argue that he doesn't have to pay tovat hana'ah because you would have had to give them the money. Now again, I'm not getting into the actual halachic concepts here because it's very complicated in each of these cases. In yeshiva, they spend 3 weeks on the sugya of takva kohen. It's very difficult. All the different mifashim, it's very hard. I'm not here to get into the halacha of it. I want to illustrate this idea that aniyeh ircha kodmin. That if a person has a family member that needs tzedakah, before you give tzedakah to anybody else, where does charity begin? At home. Charity begins at home. That's halacha. It's not a nice statement. It's not a quote that you put on a refrigerator. It's a halacha. Okay? There's kadima in issues of tzedakah. What comes first? And how do we decide which tzedakah comes first? Proximity. The closest people in the world, my blood relatives, my family comes first. So if one of them needs tzedakah, before you give tzedakah to someone else, my responsibility is to them. The anim of my city come before anim of anywhere else. Now, by the way, when people give money to Chabad of Bulgaria and Hawaii and who knows where, most of the time the reason why they're giving money is because they had to go there for work, or they go there repeatedly for work. There's no kosher food. There's no minyan. There's some Chabad shaliach over there braving the elements by himself. So they donate money because they have an obligation not only from tzedakah, but from hakarat hatov. Okay? So that's why they're doing that. But who comes first? Aniyei ircha. The people of your city. Rav Berkowitz explained this to me once. He said the pshat, the idea is that the ones that are closest to you are the ones that you know their story the best. So since in the closeness there comes an ability to understand and to help more, I have that obligation, that responsibility. But look at this pasuk where the pasuk is telling you how careful we are in attributing responsibility by inches. You're this much closer, you're responsible because you're the closest. Okay? Now, I was thinking to myself, you see clearly from here that it's not only an issue in tzedakah. You see clearly from tzedakah that it's not only an issue of murder. I'd like to suggest that proximity is always the indicator of responsibility. So as an example, we know that there's a halakha, the pasuk says that when a friend is falling, v'hechezakta bo. Pasuk says in Parashat Be'ar, you see a person, matay yado, is losing his grip, he's losing his mortgage. What's your obligation? V'hechezakta bo. The Mefashim explain that the words v'hechezakta bo over there don't only mean that you give him money. Because if it meant money, it would have said, what it usually says, patoach tiftach yadecha, naton titen, ha'anek ta'anik, right? Different languages. Aser ta'aser. It says v'hechezakta bo. Give him chizuk. Now, oftentimes, you and I, we think about the concept of tzedakah in terms of bottom line money, dollars. But when we spoke on Shabbat afternoon, last week, about the mitzvah of tzedakah, we spoke about the fascinating idea that when the pasuk tells us, Al te'ametz et levavecha, don't close your heart. Give him, you should surely give him. We saw the beautiful idea that there are times when a person doesn't have anything to give. He still has an obligation to give, if he can't give money, to give his heart. So don't close your hand, but also don't close your heart. Sometimes what the person might need is for you to care about his situation. We quoted Rambam in Matnot Aniyim, chapter 10, where Rambam writes explicitly that if you give the guy money and you make him feel worthless, the whole money that you gave is worth nothing. So this concept of v'hechezakta bo is not only about money. The guy's lost his way. You come back to the guy and you tell him, I know it's a tough situation, but you know what, you got to keep your head up. Guy's like, I can't, I tried 20 times. Maybe he doesn't need a loan from you. Maybe he needs you to remind him of what a persuasive salesman he could be. Maybe you need to remind him of how popular he was with the crew. I'm sure, so many people love you. If you let the people know that you're struggling and you need the opportunity to have some jobs in your field, look, all these people love you. They would all help you. That chizuk that you give to that person is unbelievable. I always thought this idea that maybe that's why the Torah, when it's communicating, uses different words when it's talking about Am Yisrael. What words do we have in the Torah describing Am Yisrael? Re'echa. What's it called? Ezrach Yisrael. Called Ezrach Yisrael Yishuv Besukot. Right? Amitecha. But the Torah, in speaking about tzedakah, talks about achicha. What the Torah is communicating is that every Jew, for every person, is not only your friend, not only your acquaintance, not only a fellow citizen, but they're your brother. And you have an obligation when you can and where you can to be able to support the person as achicha. Now again, I want to be clear. Sometimes that's in money. Sometimes that's in doing something. But what if you can't do something? What if they're asking you to do something that you can't do? You don't have the power, you don't have the position, you don't have the ability, you don't have that person's ear that they want you to talk to. So then what? What do? You give them the gift of listening, of advice. That's the behechezakta bo that a person can give over here. And what illustrates that hayuv, achicha, what illustrates when you define it as aniyeh ircha, is their proximity, their connection with you. Your brother, your cousin, your friend comes before just any other person in Israel, even though they are also called your brother and your friend. So, the first question I want to ask you today, I'm going to ask you in the format of a visual. I want you to imagine yourself at the center of the universe. For some people that's not hard, they already imagine themselves like that all the time. But imagine yourself as the center of the universe. Now I want you to draw circles around you. Okay? Imagine some Jewish person that you never met in your history of your life, okay? Jewish guy, lives in, I don't know, Russia, Ukraine, never met him, you might never meet him. Imagine that person inside the outermost circle, okay? Now I want you to imagine the innermost circle. Who's in your innermost circle? Your wife, your children, okay? I don't know, some people in their innermost circle is their best friend. Some people in their second circle is their best friend. Some people, their inner circle is their best friend. Their second circle is their family. I'm not judging your circles yet. Yet. Maybe a different time. But my friends, take a look at those first three circles. Who's there? Who's there who needs you? Who's there that you could do something for them that will change their life? And I don't mean you bought the guy a house. I don't mean that. I mean the person's in the dumps. And there's something you could do, sliding scale. We have an obligation because of our proximity. Now you're thinking to yourself, it's my son-in-law, it's my daughter-in-law, let their parents. And by the way, they're closer in proximity to her perhaps than you. But if they're not doing something, or they can't do something, and you can, so the closest person in the proximity of that individual that can do something has an obligation to do so. One of the things as a rabbi you hear all the time is about people who do the greatest things for everyone in the community, but for their own children and their own wife and their own family, their own brothers or sisters, somehow they don't have time. You know, you're giving money to the organization that helps people with their business with failing business over there, but I'm your brother and my business is failing. And the great irony is that instead of you giving it to your brother, you give it to that organization that you know, and then your brother has to go to Sephardic Food Fund. What an absurd reality. And by the way, in Shamayim, they're going to ask you, you know, your brother didn't have to go that route. He didn't have to be humiliated. And you know, it wouldn't even cost you anymore. What's the difference? Your brother doesn't wear a plaque on his chest. What's the difference? They don't announce that donation out loud at a fundraiser, maybe. Okay. So, if anyone would like, they have a tzedakah that they want to give, but they really want a mishe berach. I'm putting out a notice now that I'm happy for anyone to send me a message of a private tzedakah chesed that they did, and they wanted a mishe berach, and instead of giving it there, they gave it to a family member or to someone that's close to them, a good friend. Call me up, tell me the details. In the Beit Knesset, at the Sefer Torah, quietly, I'll make a mishe berach with your name on it. I'll ask Hashem to give you a beracha. Fadal. But my friends, I want to share with you a scary thought. Here's my scary thought. What if proximity is responsibility? What if HaKadosh Baruch Hu made sure that you were their son? What if HaKadosh Baruch Hu made sure that you were their brother? What if HaKadosh Baruch Hu made sure that back in kindergarten, you guys sat next to each other so you'd be best friends? And the only reason why he did that, he made that closeness, was so that when this man would need you, you'd be there for him. Imagine that this is not a happy accident, but that this was planned explicitly by Borei Olam. How might that change the way we see our achrayut then? Be'ezat Hashem, Hashem should be mizakeh us always to be the ones that are helping, and never to be the ones that need that same help. Hashem should bless us, Be'ezat Hashem, to be positive forces in the areas and in the ways in which we can. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen. Rabbi